So this is kind of exciting to see this. You can see our park right there. It is.
So what are they building here?
This area right here, this area here is auto-view townhomes, and that guy has been looking around for about 10 years. It wasn't until he saw the park that suddenly he started putting infrastructure, the sewers, the connections, all of that. So he's got that going right now. And this backyard between homes. So I think it will be a good thing. Yeah, there's 1440. It's not civil. Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm good. Hey, this is another of our neighbors. This is Dr. Johnson.
Nice to meet you, Johnson. John Coleman.
And
Nice to meet you as well.
he handles Treeside Charter School. That's his
Oh,
baby.
very nice. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for letting us use it.
I extended that appreciation. I know we did. We talked. Anyways,
That's fantastic.
so we were just going over these plot plans and everything, and I was telling him about how difficult this piece was without this.
Yeah, it,
Nearly impossible.
until we added that south section into the wall zone, excuse me, we ran into a brick wall, so
Yeah.
luckily we were in a position where they were able to sell to us and made it all work out.
I will tell you, since our last neighborhood meeting at the school, that the thing that has been made known to me was, there was so much talk that night about traffic and all of that, and that seemed to be the big thing, the biggest concern everyone had. And so I went home that night and I added up all of the projects that are going on in our neighborhood. There are 682, counting yours. And if they, I think we put the brakes on 11. I talked to Bill Pepperly about it, and I said, Bill, here's the thing, 682 units, including those. And we're looking at, if each one are varying from 1 to 2 to 3 and 4 bedroom units. And if you only count 2 cars, that's 1,200 cars
Right.
on that little section of State Street. And we only have a signal at 1320, and we have one at 1820. And that's it until you hit, Northeast. That's it. So UDOT's going to have to come to the table at some point.
They've been great to work with so far with us. I don't know if it's in here, but we're putting in a decel lane
Yeah.
across the front side of the upholstery building.
Yeah. And I did read all of that. That's why I asked you for that.
Yeah.
I actually have an appointment tomorrow morning with Meg, where these numbers came from, so that I can fully understand
Oh, okay.
what we're looking at in the future, because we don't want to shut anybody down. We don't have complete streets yet. The one to the north of you, where parents go out. That is a concern, because there's the DNP storage units right there, so it kind of tees
Right.
from his school, it tees right into that partially finished road. Now, the good thing, I don't have it on this map, so I'll just tell you, the good thing about what's going on down there, there is, do you know where that little granite place is? It's got some granite and quartz, and it's a little tiny building, and it's right next to Dean and Storage Units on State Street, on the west side of the street. Those people that are building there, they're just barely underway with the first part, have actually purchased some property from DNK to give them a second out, which will feed onto the street that runs north of the school. So that's why I asked you too about how much of this are you footing the bill for the streets as far as,
100%.
okay, see, that to me is a good thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we're
no.
not waiting for capital funds then from,
No, we are funding 100% of our entire project. So.
yeah, that's great, that's great. And I asked him a lot of questions, but I can't show you down here because this is all his project.
Right.
I do nothing. But still, I mean, it would be good to see more things if we take care of the traffic first. That's the not safe streets, you know. So I'm hoping, and I'm sure, because I talked with Bill Pepperoni about these numbers, and the mayor as well, and it's gone to the engineering. I'm trying to think.
Jonathan, right?
Or Joshua. It was either Jonathan or Joshua.
Jonathan Subak.
Okay, so is he one of the head ones? Okay, yeah, so it was one of the head traffic engineers that I spoke with. And he said, yeah, you know, we're supposed to check and see what's going on. But there are words, supposed to. More than once I heard, in a perfect world. No. No, you can't get to the future with supposed to, in a perfect world, and, you know. So that's why I want to go talk to these guys that furnish the numbers for Hales.
Sure.
So I don't think, no one has come to me and brought up any concerns. This has been posted on our Facebook page even.
Okay.
So if anyone had any concerns, they should come up tonight.
Sure.
So, but I think we're okay.
We'll see what
Well,
happens.
thank you for forgiving me. You know, when you have a family member die, it's hard to, that's why I was scared. Anyways, I was just going to share the traffic study.
No, you're good.
So-
If you have any questions, let me know.
Oh, I will. We will. Right? I have to tell you.
How's it going?
Good.
Just like this.
What's that? Hopefully it stays this small. Let's keep it this way.
He is. He is. Okay, so this was the thing.
You got a chain in the padlock we can throw in there?
This is correct. Those are peak periods. This has to start at 2:30.
Our time starts at 3 o'clock.
Okay. Okay, so 3 o'clock would be fine, so that just needs to come up and go. And that's one of the things that and that's in October, so, and I know they can't keep things running. At some point, they have to say, okay, we're taking this information. So, so that's something I will discuss with the two. This is a good report from them. So, it should be,
When it says peak, it doesn't give you an idea of how many cars are going through.
it does. I do that. And you can see, yeah, it's enough.
At 5 o'clock, you can get out of person.
Okay, so here, these are numbers. All of these are numbers if you question them. It pretty much tells you when people are coming and going. This is a big one. Yeah. 15 trips. And I think that is throughout the day. I think that's the thing is they do those numbers. And you can see this isn't a whole lot right now. Part of this big number are the school buses. So, and this is here, and this is here, and this is here, and that's it. It's going to get progressively bigger. The good thing is, all of these will have a route between. So this one connects with the one that goes on the west side of the. So we are making lots of the
Spring Creek is just from here that way.
from State Street.
All right. Sorry guys, give me about 30 more seconds. Blast off. Anybody really excited about the Pledge of Allegiance?
I'll do it. Okay, you got my volunteer right here.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. You have the B team managing the discussion tonight here, so I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance and welcome any suggestions people have about the operation and the format and that type of a thing. But that being said, tonight we'll go ahead and open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Phillips has agreed to lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We just have one item on the agenda tonight, I believe. It is a public hearing, and before we commence with that, we are going to go ahead and take a roll call. We'll start to our left up here, if you would.
Lisa Jensen, I don't have any conflicts.
Laurie Urquiaga, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Andrew Howard, no conflicts.
Russell Phillips, no conflicts.
Maria Winden, no conflicts.
Thank you very much. So item number one, the applicant requests project plan approval for a 208 apartment unit development located at 1400 South State Street in the medium-density residential zone in the Spring Creek neighborhood. Mr. Ardmore, do you want to describe that for us?
Yeah, thank you. So you all might remember that this came through with a rezone and concept plan a couple months ago. That was approved by the council, so now the applicant has come back with his final project plan. Just to remind you of the area we're looking at, if you can look on your screens, might be better than looking up there. Everything highlighted in red, so starting up on 1320 South, behind the bus station and the industrial property there, and going down to 1512 South on State Street. I think maybe when you had seen the concept plan with the zone change, not all of this property was procured. So this might be different than what you remember before. He's been able to make a little bit better of a project now with this property. So we can see here that there's 13 buildings. In every building, there's 16 two-bed, two-bath units, making the 208 apartments. Density is at 27 units an acre, so it's meeting, it's falling below what the medium density maximum is. Required parking for this, we'll get into a little bit later, would be 468 by our standard. They're proposing a 438. I'll go into that in a little bit later. I just wanted to address on this slide, the apartments put along this new street, two new streets, kind of fitting a pretty peculiar shaped parcel. As you can see above, we've got some different land uses that have come in recently. The condos that are, I believe, affordable FHA condos, 2-bed, 1-bath, 64 of those, and then down the street on 1320, 44 3-bed, 3-bath townhomes have been approved. So there's a lot of development in the area. We've got, with these three projects, we've got three different types of low to medium density housing in the area since the zoning's come through. Here's the landscape plan, kind of gives you a better zoomed in picture of what is being proposed. So you can see the buildings there and the parking. You see how the street had a kind of dog leg out to State Street to get the curves right. But that's provided a little bit more habitable open space with the dog park on the south, and then the biggest open space accumulation is in the center there on the north side of the street with the sports court, tot lot, and barbecue pits there. So they've met and exceeded the open space requirements, amenity requirements for the zone with the number of units they have. Looking at the elevation and floor plan, you'll see in your packets that Design Review Committee did approve this. They did have a recommendation to, if you could see on the colored elevation, they had a recommendation or a suggestion to change the fascias on these to match the patios, just to give a more consistent look. So that's a recommendation that they gave with their approval. And then you can see how the floor plans are going to work. It's just copied throughout all the buildings. And there's the DRC approval. And here's the two things I wanted to kind of mention in relation to the parking request. Since we adopted a new section in 1437.050, it allows a residential project like this to request a reduction in parking with a engineered parking study, and a transportation demand management plan. The applicants provided both of those things. You could see the recommendations on the summary page here on the parking study fall well below what's being asked for. What's being asked for is 2.1 spaces per unit rather than the code measurement of 2.25. They've tried to help that by reducing the demand with these management techniques of increased bike storage, carpool spaces spread throughout the site, 52 in total, and then some additional motorcycle parking spaces to lower some of that parking demand from the 2.25 to the 2.1. Staff's gone over this proposal. It meets all the sections of code with the medium density residential zone. The only thing that's in question is approval of the reduced parking plan. That's up for Plan Commission discussion. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Ardmore?
On their plan that they have for reducing their parking, they have 4 per building, so 52 total priority parking spaces for ride sharing. I've never seen this before, and I've never ever seen it being used in a high density place like this. So is there any experience you've had with this that you can explain to me if that's, I just look at that and think that's 52 spaces. Are there really going to be 200 people in that complex that are going to meet at those spaces and carpool together?
I can speak to that. So those are spaces that are designated as carpool spaces. The High Line project on North Freedom, about 500 North and Freedom on the southeast corner there, they used that as one of their demand management techniques that was approved. And then Blue Sky, that is yet to be completed through the process, but they had that as part of theirs as well over on 200 East Center.
So does that mean it's an empty spot that no one can park in unless they're in a carpool pickup vehicle?
If they designate it as such with signage or painting on the ground, that would enforce that. That's up to
that
the
just seems
management group.
excessive to me, and that seems like an easy answer to the parking waiver. Even if it's a carpool space, how many hours a day does one carpool car sit there idling, waiting for passengers? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the intent here, but that seems like a huge number for a development that may be filled with a demographic that's not likely to participate in a van pool.
What does, if I can follow up on that, what does a carpool vehicle look like? Who owns it? I mean, is this like UTA van pool? Is this big employers?
So these questions might be better directed towards a developer. I think it could be one of two things. I think it could be a designated carpool car, or it could be designated for tenants that share a car in an apartment. So you'd have to ask the developer more detail.
I'll bring
on that.
this up in a minute.
Okay.
When we get, I appreciate your willingness to be ready there. I sort of had the same reaction. I've missed that, I guess, on other projects where that's been discussed relative to a parking reduction.
I think the main thing that staff looked at on this is you've got 208 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments, and you're still parking at 2.1. I don't imagine a lot of people with a 2-bedroom apartment are bringing more than 2 cars, so it made sense to staff. But again, it is up to the Plan Commission to recommend on that.
I have another question.
Please.
Is there an occupancy restriction on a two-bedroom, 2-bath apartment? Can they have 6 people in it?
The maximum occupancy is 1 family or 3 unrelated singles.
So it's the same as other places.
What was that number again? Sorry.
1 family or 3 unrelated singles.
Because that would be another concern I would have, that how do we regulate that? Because in other areas of the city,
Zoning
it's
enforcement.
very difficult to regulate unless neighbors tattle on each other.
Yeah, occupancy violations are always the hardest to enforce.
And that's where your parking problems tend to erupt, is if you've got 2 singles living in each, not even singles, but 2 people with cars living in each bedroom, that's 4 cars per unit instead of 1.5. Anyway, those are my concerns.
Any other questions of staff? I'm going to stall for a second. I think I have one. I'm going to just prove my ignorance when I ask it, so try to buffer that here a little bit. This is project plan approval. Zoning's in place, so our latitude in terms of making suggestions and that type of a thing, it sounds like parking's relatively, well, parking's the issue, it seems to me, really.
And I don't know, were you on it when it came around last time around? I mean, we've seen this.
I think I was.
Yeah, we have some new members on here. We had a similar discussions on the parking, and they're good questions. These are all good questions, but we kicked it around, changed the zone, and you're bringing it back because the parking study, right, and the memorandum.
And because before it's a concept plan, so by code, all final project plans come back to you
Yeah.
of this magnitude.
And it's gone through the design review committee, so it's been kicked around once before, so parking was the issue.
Okay. Planning Commission is a recommending body on this one, is that right? Or are we the?
It's a decision.
Okay. Once again, thank you. Didn't sound like there was much more for staff. Okay, would the applicant like to present?
Just address the parking questions. Originally, the parking was actually not.
Thanks again. How's that?
So I'm John Coleman. I represent the developer. Originally, parking on our original layout was actually not an issue. We met the 468 units. When we met with UDOT, we had to tie into State Street, and they wanted a specific angle coming off of State Street to make that all work. And they wanted us to provide a parking lot to the building to the north of our entrance as well. So we had to adjust our plan to accommodate what UDOT was asking for. When we came in originally also, the parking lot that we have right there that is adjacent to State Street actually was kind of frowned upon, and was addressed to me that would be a way that we could maybe increase some open space. So we did what we did to try to accommodate both the northern building and try to make it less of an eyesore. And we're open to reducing the amount of carpool spaces that are required or that are allowed. The idea was that we would probably have some student housing, and plenty of students share similar classes, so having them carpool and keep saving spaces for them that were semi-close to buildings was the idea, but that's not necessarily something that we're stuck with, so whatever you guys recommend, we're open to.
Let me just clarify a couple of things, if I may. So what he was referring to is that there's a commercial building here, and this new parking lot for that building will come off this new street right there. So
Yeah.
that's what he's referring to on that. And the angle and all of that from UDOT is it caused this street to swoop further south than what the original concept plans showed. And that has impacted their parking, that they had a row of parking all along there on the other side of that drive aisle that was lost when they had this road alignment get shifted. So those are some of the things that he was referring to.
Correct. That's all I had to present, other than what Aaron had. If you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to answer any other questions you guys may have.
Please.
I have 2 questions. On the engineering study, it says on one of the bullet points underneath where it says according to Provo City Code. It says it is recommended that a TDM program, and it says coupling of rent with on-site parking fee. So are you going to charge for parking?
No, so the assigned tenant parking on the other page, under the TDM plan, the assigned tenant parking with each unit, every unit will be assigned at least one parking space to them.
Okay, I don't. Okay,
And that'll be part of the regular rent rate that they would pay up front.
okay, thank you. The other question I had, we received a letter from Curtis Worston, Provo South resident. Did you receive a copy of it?
I did not know.
Perhaps I could let you read this.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to drop it, throw it at you.
Why don't you just state for the record basically what he was asking for?
He was just asking if the developer would be able to make any of the units into townhomes, make them bigger, to allow for longer-term residents to live there, stating that this area of Provo seems to have an abundance of this size of unit, which allows for short-term residency, but not so much long-term residency. And that long-term residency is something that the neighborhood would like to see more of. And just asking if that is something that maybe some of your units, he didn't specify how many, kind of leaving that up to the developer, but just asked if that was something that you might be able to accommodate.
We actually looked at doing townhomes here first, and didn't get a great warm feeling about trying to do that. The way we were trying to do it didn't really meet a lot of what the code recommendations were. And so it's something that we actually tried to do from the get-go, but it just didn't seem to really match what the city really wanted here.
Okay, were you trying to do all of them townhomes?
Oh, yeah,
or
the whole
just
project
mixed?
is townhomes.
Okay. All right. Bill, is that something that was kind of discouraged? Is this more in line of what is wanted down in that area?
Well, the design you've looked at tonight is probably the third or fourth design they came up with for the property. The first several that included the townhouse project, the site plan just wasn't very good, and staff would not lend support to that. The entire project was parking lot or rooftop, and it was very difficult to pull the buildings out to the street and put parking where it needed to belong. Townhomes are parked in a very different way than a stacked project. So the townhouse concepts that they went over with the staff just did not garner staff support.
Okay, thank you. Would there be any way to make a few of these townhomes and have the support be within the guidelines of what would be acceptable to the city?
Let's go to the area map. I guess that's possible in that the concepts that we first saw only included this property, which was bought from Pro Steel. This is Pro Steel here, and this used to be part of the Pro Steel property. So the original plans we saw just included that. And the two or three plans that we saw on that were all undesirable, let's just put it that way. So we encouraged the developer to acquire more land so that they'd have enough width to actually try to get something to work that would make more sense. So they did go out and acquire this piece and that piece, which gives it more depth. With that added depth, yeah, you probably could make townhouses work. You may recall that there's a townhouse development right here. Spring Creek Townhomes, I think they called it. That's the one with the kind of more modern architecture. They were 4-bedroom units, if you remember that.
There's even more up here, bottom view.
And there's Autumn View townhomes there, and then this owner is negotiating with the city to buy this piece, and he's looking at doing either more townhomes, or the city has encouraged him to look at doing some type of live-work type of product, because that's a product they don't have in the area, and he has expressed open-mindedness to doing that. Since the city's selling them the property, I think the city has a lot of ability to encourage what the city wants there.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wendon? I'm sorry, Commissioner Urquiaga?
Going back to the parking and the assigned parking, were you planning to allow additional tenants to perhaps purchase additional parking rights, or is that?
We can definitely do that. That's something we hadn't thought about, but not something we're necessarily against.
I'm just curious as to how that would work if you had like 3 people with 3 cars, and whether or not they would be able to get assigned parking.
Sure, yeah. I don't think that we'd be against that.
Okay.
Any other questions of the applicant? Please.
So maybe it's just because I'm late to the game, but that strip on the west side of the property, between the railroad tracks and the bus depot, just seems like a really undesirable place to live. So is that too honest? I just worry because, I mean, it's, you know, nobody who has a dog could live there because it's a half a mile from the dog park. And the trains are noisy a half a mile away, so they're going to be really noisy right there. I just am wondering, like, what your plan is for that to make sure this stays a nice place like you want it to be, instead of a place no one wants to live.
Yeah, so the idea is that we run a masonry or precast concrete fence along the boundary line there, and then run street trees up that will eventually grow and hopefully help block some of that sound and annoyance from the train yard that's there.
So to make them think they're not next to the trains.
Exactly.
Okay.
Where exactly would the wall be placed?
Right on the boundary line.
Which boundary line? The right-of-way for the railroad?
The right-of-way right behind essentially you'd have a 4-foot park strip and then the boundary line right behind curb. So we'd run it right along boundary line of the back of road.
On the east or west side of the road?
On the west side of the road.
West side, thank you.
If I may, in addition to that, if you review the southeast neighborhood plan, it identifies that area west of the road as a parkway trail. So future improvements there would potentially have trail, trees, landscaping, kind of enhance the area and be a pedestrian way.
Does that mean that if he builds a masonry wall, that the Parkway Road would be on the opposite side of that wall? Like, that would need to be considered right now?
Yeah, I think we need to give some thought to that, because I don't think we want
You don't want to
wall
cut that off.
Right. If you put the wall and the trails on the other side of the wall, that creates a lot of blind spots.
Sure.
Along that trail that could become dangerous. So it may be better that the wall is on the other side of the trail, which integrates the trail into the neighborhood and provides a buffer between the railroad track and the trail. So we should probably take a look at that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Any other questions of the applicant?
Do you know what the average rent will be roughly? Would you consider this lower income?
It is lower income. I wish I would have looked this up before I left. I want to say it's $11.95 a unit.
Somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have just a few. I am not familiar with a fourplex investment model. Can you help me understand what that is, what it means for this?
So essentially how it's set up is we have a pool of investors that come in and purchase one stack. So each building has 16 units. There's four levels. Each building has 4 stacks of 4 levels. So it's a vertical fourplex. So you could potentially have 4 different owners on one building that own from the ground through the roof of that one stack. But it's all managed by the same property management company, and it's all managed by the same homeowners association. And that's part of how we sell it, is that it all has to stay in-house with our management group and our HOA.
But you have a lot of different
There's potentially,
investors.
yeah, there's
and-
potentially, if there's 13 buildings, you can have
Right.
70 different owners.
Okay.
That brings up the question of, like maintenance and everything, the owners are then required to pay into a central budget for that?
Yes, so they pay our property management company a property maintenance fee. All of the exteriors of the buildings are encompassed within the CC&Rs to cover whatever maintenance, roofing, and exterior needs to be done. And then each individual owner is responsible for any maintenance inside the buildings. And that's all controlled by our property management and property maintenance company.
So plumbing issues, they just go to the maintenance company, and the maintenance company gets the money from the owners, or?
Correct. It's paid on a monthly basis with their rentals that come through. So as soon as rents are paid, money's automatically transferred into a pool to cover those costs.
Okay.
Okay. Going one more
Well,
time here.
do we have room for do we have room for the wall and then to move the trail in like we were talking about?
I have the impression that that's going to take a little bit more time, probably on the part of staff, to really look at, is my guess. Anybody ready to, I'm guessing that you need another 20, maybe 20 plus feet outside edge of curb to the railroad right-of-way line for the trail. Give or take a few feet. Please, yeah, if you can help answer that. If you don't mind, we'll look to Mr. Day to help us with that.
David Day with Public Works. So, yeah, we would need some time to look at that, but any type of facility next to a railroad tracks, the railroad likes 25 feet offset, so we wouldn't be able to get any closer than that, and then we'd have to look at what's left over there. But there is, along this area, quite a bit of unused space in certain spots along there. So if you've ever worked with the railroad, you know that that's not just a quick process. So,
And there's no guarantee on its outcome, right?
yeah,
You can't assume.
yeah. And so our hope is that we'd be able to negotiate a line between public space and the railroad that would allow us to build a nice trail, but we didn't feel like we would want to delay a project and say, hey, before you can build your project, you need to go work with the railroad and work all these issues out, because some of the stuff we worked with them on takes 5-10 years to work these things out. But the idea is to have kind of a bermed trail with trees and stuff along it, a nice feature, but that's going to take some time.
It's hard to make it a nice feature, right? You've got so many strikes against you. Railroad tracks. You got steel fabrication facilities and just all of the other uses along the corridor.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're aware or not, but maybe kind of point out to you the vision of this road along the railroad tracks is it will come and tie in up through to the park in 1150 South. Also, it comes all the way down and will come down and tie in to 1640. Not with this project, but eventually this is the idea. And then go underneath the Lakeview Parkway and tie into 2000 South, which is kind of in the Novatech area. Larson, well, what's it called? Tracy Hall Parkway now. So there'd be this big, long road, and hopefully we can get a nice trail in there someday when we are able to work that out with the railroad.
I guess I appreciate that vision. Boy, and I'm just trying to put together something of an educated guess with what we're looking at here. I think, based on this, once that road gets put in, the options for putting a trail on the west side of the road, particularly with the way you're envisioning it, which I think is the right vision, the only way to try to make that attractive to people for recreational use is to berm it, to create some kind of separation between what's going on next to it and to create almost more of a linear park than just a big sidewalk next to a street. There's not room for that. You know, you're gonna need 30 or 40 feet if you're talking berming and landscaping and space between a wall and a trail and a curb. So I feel like this forever defines what can or can't happen with that kind of facility and probably sets the tone all along the rail line.
Yeah, and in most of the areas along here, we'll have that kind of space.
You do or don't?
But when does
We will.
when is that defined? It seems like it's defined at this point, right?
Yes, but there is excess property, so it's hard to see it at this scale, but there is probably 30 feet there of usable space.
Really? That, if this roadway is how wide? 32 feet maybe?
66.
Well, for the whole
Well, the
right of
right-
way,
yeah,
I'm
the
just
right
trying
of
to
way.
eyeball.
So,
Yeah, so.
To the back curb, then we would have,
Half of that, you know, the whole right of way width.
yeah, and I don't know if that's,
And, you know, so maybe to the point that it would take some
Scaled right.
time
yeah.
to figure that out, but
In the neighborhood plan, it shows that concept that you were just describing with the bermed area and the trail kind of meandering
might
along.
be akin to the trail next to University Parkway in
Yeah.
some respects. Again, probably not as wide, but berming, meandering through, you know, different.
Yeah, separated, not a combination, but it would be separated from the curb.
Once upon a time, there were plans for some pretty elaborate pedestrian kind of facilities on State Street too.
On the east side,
Down to this corner here, I think, right? Is this where that ends?
yeah, it actually goes down to
Go beyond
Ninth
that.
South right now. And the idea is to take that the rest of the way, and then we've started that coming down Ninth East also in certain areas along the BRT route. And hopefully we'll be able to continue that down Ninth East eventually.
Thank you once again.
But yeah, you're right, it'll be a city project to build this facility.
So this, I think, goes to you, Dave, but how is the developer supposed to put, I just don't understand how they can be expected to put a fence on the other side of a trail that doesn't exist yet, and yet if the trail is built on the other side of the fence, it creates a security risk.
Yeah, and so maybe I didn't look at the plans close enough, but this is the first time I've understood that there would be a fence over there. I don't know if anyone's looked at that, so we'll have to look at that and see what issues that would bring up. But yeah, we wouldn't want a fence right there where we would just have to tear it out in the future.
But if the idea now is to put the fence, I don't mean to interrupt, but to put the fence on the right-of-way line, which I would think that's where it's gonna go, you'd want to have as much space. And I assume this property that we're talking about abuts the right-of-way line. So that's what we're
Yeah,
working with. So
that's,
legally, you could go that far.
yeah, that's the part that takes time, because the railroad doesn't mark their right-of-way. They just say, hey, we have right-of-way.
Certain distance typically from the track, right?
Yeah, and so there's kind of a gap there right now of unclaimed property on both sides that we have to go in and negotiate. You know, are you guys willing to say that 25 feet is good enough? Because they could come and say, oh, we acquired the other 30 feet years ago, we just haven't used it. So those are the sticky issues that take the time, and it's anybody's guess what will happen there.
It just seems to me that you're putting the developer in a really compromised position here with this situation that he's got the development plan, but we're changing it in a way that I think is improvement, but you have no way of knowing when or how, and he's got to rely on approval if that's what happens.
All we were expecting from the developer is to build the road and the curb and gutter. That's all I was envisioning there.
Honestly,
So-
if we don't have to if we don't need to put a fence in right there as of right now, we're fine with that. We wanted to put it there to create a buffer between our residents and the train tracks, but a row of street trees is gonna do plenty to keep a buffer there already. So keeping a 6-foot precast fence off of there to save you guys the trouble in the future is fine by me.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Appreciate that.
just,
Let's, do you mind if we let Mr. Pepperoni?
so just to clarify the process, this is project plan approval. If this is granted tonight, he still has to go through final plan approval with the staff. So the final plans are construction level drawings. It's very detailed. Perhaps as we work through those final drawings, maybe the best thing to do is for the city to take from the developer the funds for the wall, and we'll install it at what time we're able to put a continuous wall and a continuous trail along there. I mean, there may be some solution like that we reach during the final construction drawing stage. I just didn't want you to think that this is the end and after this he starts building. We're not quite there yet.
Okay, let's go back, just. Anything else? Anything else there? Please.
I don't know if you said you were willing to get rid of the carpool spots. I certainly don't want to get rid of carpool spots if they serve a purpose. But my question in asking about that was that if you subtract the math from those carpool spots, you have enough parking spots to not need to ask for the different parking allowance that you had asked for tonight. So that's where I was confused. If we weren't trying to present the parking initiative proposals, then there was enough parking already. So did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, so those 54 spaces are part of the 438 provided.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson,
Please.
I just had a question about the carpool cars. Is a husband and wife sharing a car on the way to work, is that considered a carpool car? I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, I'm asking.
Yeah, anything that's considered an HOV car on the highway would technically be considered a carpool car.
So to that point, and I guess to my question earlier, what isn't a carpool vehicle? I mean, really?
Yeah, and I don't know. Answer that.
And I looked to staff, if this is something that we're using as justification to recommend that a parking reduction be given, it seems like we should understand really clearly how it's working to reduce the need for parking.
To be frank, that was provided pretty late. And in staff's opinion, that wasn't really needed, right? So you've got 2.1 stalls per unit. You've got a dedicated public street all along that runs east and west where you could park on it. So even if some of the units have more than 2 cars, there's plenty of parking in the general area where there's not going to be overflow into, there's no neighboring single-family residential to upset with overflow parking. It's industrial lands and medium-density residential. So honestly, we were okay with the 2.1 as is.
As I remember the last discussion, you looked at a similar project in Orem, and there were way under the 2 point being utilized there, and it was a basis for discussion.
Right.
And the last planning commission said that, you know, given the odd shape of the property and we're not shaving that much, there's a mitigation plan that, at least at the last discussion, they thought it was copacetic with things.
Yep.
So Mr. Howard is right, but Mr. Howard, you should also realize that the project in Orem that you're comparing this to is very similar to the project that was right here, right? Where because of their FHA rules, it was going to be a majority of owner occupancy, where we've been told by the applicant that this is all sold to investors. And because of those FHA rules, even after those owners turn over, they have to keep the higher percentage in owner units rather than investor units. It tends to be in the investor units where we run into the occupancy problems of people wanting to, you know, rent to more individuals than is legal because it yields more rent.
Makes sense.
So just to clarify, we're not going to put up no parking signs on every street in this development and force them to park somewhere else. They actually can park on the streets that are in front of their house.
Well,
The one on the west boundary between the railroad, are they going to be able to park on both sides of that one?
yes, you can park on any city street except in those neighborhoods where they have adopted some type of parking enforcement program.
Could they foreseeably decide that along with their HOA officiation that they are going to say no parking on this neighborhood street?
They could petition the city council to do that, yes. I don't know why they would.
I just am making
But-
sure, because those are the things where I've seen in the past where parking has become a problem because a development said, oh, we want our neighborhood to be nice, so no one parks on the street, and then they park on the adjacent streets.
Yeah, it hasn't been so much with the development saying we want our neighborhood to be nice. Where we have the problems are projects very similar to this, that are right next to a single-family neighborhood, and they don't have enough parking here, so people park on the streets up in that single-family neighborhood. And so that impact starts to annoy that neighborhood. What Mr. Arbor was saying was that with these surrounding uses, there's really not much potential for that to happen, and you cannot park on State Street.
Right. But you can park on those streets that are going to be built within this development.
Yes.
There's no,
Well,
they don't have the right to take that away easily, is what I'm asking.
That's correct. Now, Mr. Day, is this going to be some type of collector road that would not allow parking on it? Do you know?
No, the width of all those roads would be able to support parking on both sides, and they would be public roads, so the only mechanism to put no parking on there would be a city action that says, hey, we don't want parking there, so there's a committee that handles that and decides what to do with areas that are submitted as a possible no parking area. But as far as the owners of this being able to go out and just say no parking on the street, they couldn't do that.
So in the zoning requirements where it dictates the parking for each size of a development, how do you know when to take on-street parking into account? Like if we're going to say, yeah, it's okay for us to reduce this because there's so much space for it to overflow, what does that really mean?
I think that's something the planning commission needs to talk about and decide. We never count on-street parking as meeting somebody's minimum. We've never done that. Mr. Armour, I think, was trying to say that's kind of a safety valve.
Line work up here, that's curious to me, along the road. What is that? It looks like parking.
At one time, we did try to submit without understanding that we couldn't use on-street parking as
Okay.
part of our requirement. I think that just never got deleted.
Okay, got it.
That's not counting towards our parking.
Okay. We can circle back to the applicant if we want to. Does anybody have any concern with us asking comments from the public now? Okay, is there anybody from the public here that would like to speak to our item, the one and only?
I'm so glad you guys think of every question in the book that could ever be. This was well received at the neighborhood meeting when he was working with just that tiny little piece of difficult property. It looks so much better now. I took it upon myself to read the parking study and the traffic study. And in the parking study, they actually used 15 different apartment complexes with similar things. How many parking places were being used, how many sat empty, and it ends up being wasted space. So I think that's something, worth looking at, and I'm sure you guys probably read the parking study I can't tell from your expressions. Anyway, so the neighborhoods behind this, it's something I think that could be good. It's not perfect, yes, it's along a railroad track. But if you look in the Southeast Area Plan on page 28, you will find the rendition, brief as it is, as to that trailway. And the trailway suggests that we should use about 35 feet total from the edge of the curb. Okay?
Will you state your name for us?
Oh, Mary Miller, Spring Creek Neighborhood Chair.
Thank you. Crowd's pretty small tonight. Anybody else want to speak? We will go ahead and close the public hearing then. Any other questions of the applicant or staff? Any discussion among ourselves as commissioners?
Are we at a consensus about whether this parking requirement can be waived for him?
What are we thinking? Do you want to share your thoughts
I
there?
just have lived in Provo a long time and seen a lot of angry people over parking. And so I just worry. I know this is a great place for this development and it's zoned for it and it seems like a great use. I just worry about fudging the rules once for fear that we have to do it again or that someone expects it to be done again. So I want to make sure that we're not setting a precedent that we're going to regret.
I think, if I may, I think it depends on your faith in that study, because I think that this whole process, why we're here tonight again, is because we made some changes to incorporate consideration of such studies. And everything we're asking tonight was asked at last meeting, and I think they're very valid points. I think one of the things that speaks in favor of this is the favor of the neighborhood. One of the other things that I remember, and I may be fuzzy on this, is that the neighborhood is generally in a transition from heavy industrial to residential, and this was thought as an encouraging step in that direction. And that's something that stands out in my mind. Personally, it's living along the tracks, and I've done that as a college student. I remember the kitchen table bouncing as the UP went down the line, but younger kids, that's not that big a deal to them. I don't remember having any. I look forward to listening to the train, but I wouldn't do it now. But anyway, I'm in favor of the project.
How about on the parking? It sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if we're just talking about that.
I'm okay with the parking, given where it is and given the explanations that I've heard, especially, the parking discussions that you got some industrial. I think over time, a lot of those things will resolve themselves as the other properties develop. I like what Bill said about looking in the future for a contiguous strip along there. That's gonna have to be worked out, and I frankly don't know how that's gonna happen. But
Most of our parking issues that we have, and all of us have heard them and know that they exist, but they're maybe not all the major neighborhood, but in that area of that school area, a lot of those older homes were developed into student housing, and they put as many students as they could in there until zoning would force them out. And the residents who lived there, they got tired of people parking in their driveways and on their streets, and that's where a lot of complaints come in. My concern with this particular project, we're a few parking stalls short of what's required, but we're not next to residential families. They're not going to be parking on their streets. They're not going to be blocking their parking areas, and they have those streets to be on. And with regards to the railroad there, I too, when I was a student, I lived for 2.5 years in a little mobile home that probably was closer than that. And the first 2 weeks that I lived there, the table would shake, and my bed would shake, and I thought, oh, I've got to move. This is driving me crazy. But within 3 weeks of living there, I never even heard those trains. I mean, I seriously didn't hear them, and I guess it's just what you get used to. I think that those people, when they live there, they won't even notice them. So I'm in favor of the reduction. I don't think it'll bother anyone. I think we'll be fine there.
Mr. Winden?
Yeah, Mary's come to us before with other projects that have been proposed, and has mentioned where she has anticipated where parking was going to be a problem because there were already established projects nearby, and that she thought that parking would overflow into those areas. But I view this as a self-contained unit, so to speak, and I don't think that they have anywhere to go. Where else are they going to park except right there? And so I think they're just going to kind of sort of self-police. So I don't have a problem with the parking. And also, I think as this area continues to grow and have more residential units, I think that we'll see an increase in UTA and other forms of transportation that hopefully will alleviate the need for maybe both people in a household to have a car or to use a car every time we need to go somewhere. So I don't have a problem with the parking issue at all. So I don't, and the item that was raised by Mr. Worston, yes, I like the idea of having enticing more long-term residents to Provo. I think Provo's a great place to live. I hope that projects can come forward to do just that, but I'm in favor of this project the way it is.
Just keep going right down the line, it looks like, so.
As they say in the railroad.
You want to go?
I have no problem also with the parking. One concern that I've been thinking about, I noticed when it said in the neighborhood issues that the neighborhood chair has expressed concerns to staff regarding the number of multifamily projects that have been approved on South State Street and the possible impact traffic to the streets. I kind of feel that's right. And I have the question, with all these projects we see that are coming in, is there any plans for more schools, elementary schools? There's no place for them to shop. The Allen store used to be there, is gone. Seems like we're putting a lot of people in an area where is there going to be the amenities that they need to survive?
So I've personally met with UTA to point out all of these developments to encourage them to add bus routes to South State Street to increase or to just make more convenient the bus routes. Economic development is constantly meeting with retailers, telling them these types of developments and the numbers that are coming in to encourage commercial development. We've got the commercial area right there that Mr. Arburn's pointing to. That's an SC2 zone that we've been trying to get retail activity on for years. So we're continually meeting with people trying to get the kind of amenities you're referring to, Mr. Knudsen.
I think this is a pretty good use of that space, which seems like it's really awkward to build on. So I'm impressed with that. I'm looking at that and saying, okay, there are at least 2 stalls per unit, which makes sense to me. And there's a point, we just recently adopted the transportation demand management policy, or I don't know what is it, opportunity, whatever. And so this seems to be a perfectly appropriate place to apply that in terms of the bike use and all of that kind of thing. My one, as somebody who has occasionally visited these places, I wonder about adequate visitor parking, almost more than adequate adequate parking for the tenants. And so that would kind of be my only question. I'm assuming that, those extra 30 stalls or whatever, you've got, you'd need, let's see, 200, you need 216. So you've got 416, right? So you've got an extra 22 stalls that are not necessarily going to be used by tenants. I'm just hoping that visitor parking is scattered appropriately through it so that people can have company.
Yeah, so that's why we only wanted to implement one parking stall assigned per unit, was so that the numbered stalls were tied directly to the buildings, and then everything else was kind of fair game for residents or visitors as they came through.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm in favor of it overall, yes.
Okay, I guess it's my turn, and I deeply appreciate my colleagues' perspectives, and I have concerns, and frankly, it's not a lot of fun for me to share them, but I'm going to try to be as clear as I can. And this probably doesn't have as much to do with this project, with water being under the bridge like it is, but the act of approving rental product at this density in an area where it's between railroad tracks, a state road, next to storage units, and a steel fabrication facility, which is next to a bus depot. I don't think there probably are a lot of examples out in the world where you would see a neighborhood like this or this type of development 20 years down the road where people would look back and say, that's aged well. Zoning's in place here, that is what it is. Furthermore, 208 identical units. I'm baffled that that's the best that we get, and that's what we continuously get over and over and over again. That very uniform nature of the project, I think, in all likelihood, compounds whatever issues you will have with how this ends up working in the community over the long haul. And like I said, I'm baffled that this is what we're asking for in Provo. I don't see amenities with this project that are commensurate with what other communities get when you're talking about a 200-unit apartment development. I'm not seeing swimming pools, I'm not seeing a clubhouse, or different things that are frankly pretty common these days. It seems like the Provo version of an apartment development, kind of down to the lowest common denominator type of a model again. I'm concerned, very concerned, about putting this many dwellings, although I don't think there's much about this model that's geared towards families with kids, but the idea that you'd have rail lines that are as active as these are next to new homes and not have a significant barrier like a masonry wall between the neighborhood and that absolutely concerns me, which leads to the other concern that, it's hard to really glean a lot from an image like this in terms of trying to get an understanding for scale and that sort of a thing, but there is every bit as good of a chance, I think, that there is no room for a trail on the west side of that road as there is going to be 35 feet available for a trail corridor. So for me, then it's a process issue to continue to express concerns. We have public hearings where we get to look at projects where we really don't have a lot of influence on what happens. But even with that, we don't have plans that are developed enough to really understand all of the intricacies like that. And frankly, I think that's a pretty big deal on this. Moving forward, I'm not sure that you can put a trail on the west side of that road. So amenities, again, homogeneous product. The particular model that we're talking about here, where investors are buying in the way that they are and trying to understand what that means for how many people are going to live here, what that community looks like demographically, and how many vehicles they have. I'm not familiar with very many projects in the city or developments in this part of the community where occupancy is not an issue, where people aren't at least pushing the legal limit of occupancy with 3 unrelated singles in a home or going beyond. Most often, I feel like I hear about concerns where people are going beyond. 3 unrelated occupants of these units, in my mind, means you're not close to having enough parking. And I do appreciate, and I agree that the on-street parking is a very viable safety valve. That means more to me than Mr. Hale's study. But still, I think we can look at these things and find reasons to justify them. But in my mind, practically speaking, this would have to be completely unique from what happens in other projects like this in Provo to not have closer to 3 cars per unit than 2. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, for all kinds of reasons. I don't think that this warrants a parking reduction. I've said it before. I don't think any project along this corridor does. It's completely remote from everything, as was touched on. Whether it's parking or, whether it's shopping or employment or anything like that. I think Provo's really unique in that we have a system that would actually put that on the table here even. So those are some of my thoughts, for whatever that's worth. And I express those largely in the hope that, asked it again, and I'm running out of hope, frankly, that there can be some serious discussion about what the community's going to be with what we approve. And I'd love to have the discussion in terms of why we think things will be successful in Provo where they largely haven't been elsewhere. Again, just such uniformity with developments, same product over and over and over again. But if nobody else has anything else to say, probably motion time as I see it.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I move that the Provo City Planning Commission approve item number 1, approval for a 208 apartment unit located at 14 South State Street in the medium-density residential zone.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Do we have a second? Let's ask for a second, and then we can discuss the motion. Commissioner Winden with a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Is it appropriate to make our approval conditional upon making sure there's sufficient right-of-way to tie in with that proposed neighborhood trail system? And then I also liked the suggestion of having the developer contribute funds for the wall to be built at a later date, so we don't build it, knock it down, and build it again. Those were the two things, based on our discussion and the feedback that we got, that if we really want that trail system to happen right, I feel like those two things need to happen. But neither one of those things would prevent him from being able to go forward with his project.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and restate. It's proposed that there be an addition made to the motion in the form of conditions that the situation be evaluated to ensure that there's adequate space for the trail along the west side of the road on the west side of the project, and that the applicant be required to provide funds for the wall, with the understanding that the wall would be installed
By the city.
how I hear it, when the proper location for the wall is identified.
I would be happy to make that amendment.
Mr.
Second.
Winden?
I'll second.
Comfortable with that? Okay, so we have a motion, it's been seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'll go ahead and vote nay, just to add some color to it then. I don't know if it's customary for the chair to vote or not, but.
I think that's healthy.
So that's it for items on the agenda. Does anybody have anything
I
else they'd like to?
propose we adjourn.
Okay. We're adjourned.
Move with our feet.